how to set yourself free. Freedom. It's about setting yourself free. Maybe in the next session we will talk about how to set your cow's milk free. But first and foremost, we need to look at how to set yourself free. I was tempted to call this session a DIY freedom plan. So it could be out there with all the other DIY programs, do-it-yourself gardening, DIY car repair, DIY home renovations, DIY convert your living room into a garage, and so on. And really, this sort of DIY of yourself should be the priority. It should be out there. Knowing how to do a self-renovation, if you will, and set yourself free. This should be more commonplace. And it isn't as if people aren't concerned about freedom. I regularly see people in Trinity Bellwoods Park marching through chanting, freedom, freedom, freedom. They want freedom from wearing masks, freedom from being under lockdown, all sorts of things. Sometimes I even see them marching through their topless because they want to free their nipples, right? Free the nipples. Freedom has many faces and fronts and types of nipples, by the way. And that's great because we should know that no two nipples are alike. I actually learned this early on from my mother. As a little boy, I called one of my mother's breasts honk and the other one I called beep. No kidding. Hope I'm not giving out too much information. They each had a different name, right? Because they were each different. One was honk and one was beep. And I would play honk and beep. I was very young, very young.
Jesse, my youngest daughter, so I just have to say sun, moon.
Sun and moon.
Yeah.
All right, I love it. Breasts called sun and moon. Yeah. Well, they are cosmic orbs, aren't they? So, and likewise, no two people are alike. No two selves are the same. And actually, we are becoming increasingly less alike with each other as we individuate. In fact, as we evolve, each ego will become as dissimilar to another as one species is from another. Think of that. It makes me think of the Star Wars bar scenes, right? Where you have this incredible diversity of beings hanging out in these bars with each other, finding out what each other's like, what they like to drink, so on and so forth. And this really is the hope of the future, the diversity of individuality. Diversity of individuality. So in a sense, what we're talking about tonight is setting the self free to be an individual and a diverse individual. So this is what we'll be looking at in the series and part of what the future face of freedom will look like. And this potential is infinite diversity because why? We are not so much a human being as a human process, a being in process. And we're all going to process differently. By the way, help yourself to any of the oils there. You can pass the basket around. Sorry, we can't pass you the basket of essential oils out there, but maybe you've got one there you can open up and put on to join the vibe here, raising the vibe with pure essential oils. So this is why this session is called How to Set Yourself Free. We are all a self, an I, or if you speak Latin, an ego. Anybody here speak Latin? Really? No. It's kind of a dead language, I suppose. That was a joke. So we all need to set ourselves free individually. No other self can set you free. Nobody else can DIY for you. No more than anything else can set a caterpillar free from its chrysalis. It has to do it for itself. It's what you call an inside job. And in fact, Freedom is not only an inside job, it's an upside job. What do I mean by that? An upside job. We need to connect more and more with the upside of ourselves. We need to prioritize our vertical connection and not just our horizontal connections. We need to make our connection with the higher self the priority. How to do this and how doing this is ultimately the path to freedom is the overarching theme of this series. And I'm very excited about what is coming, very excited about the downloads and direction I have been receiving from my higher self. As Morpheus said to Neo in The Matrix, I'm trying to free your mind, Neo, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it. In situations like Neo's, sometimes people on the horizontal are acting in the place of our higher self, helping us to get hooked up with our own higher self. Morpheus is there as a mouthpiece to the higher ideal until Neo can walk on his own 2 feet, or in his case, fly with his own 2 wings. But as a teacher of freedom, such as myself, we can only at best point to the how of the DIY of freedom, and then we have to do it yourself. Morpheus also said there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And so learning to walk on your own 2 feet as an individual self will make the difference between being free and not being free. As the Bible teaches, be doers of the word and not hearers only. Faith without works is dead. Be doers of the word and not hearers only. Faith without works is dead. So what does it take to set yourself free, to do it? What does it take to translate faith, actually faith, hope, and love, as was taught in the previous series, faith, hope, and love, how to translate those into action and get results? Well, the prophet Hosea said, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So it starts with getting the right knowledge. Without the right knowledge, you can fall under illusion, come under the spell of Maya, which is the illusion of a one-sided perspective of reality. And there's certainly a difference between falling under something and understanding, as we looked at last time. Understanding, standing under so we can know, rather than falling under and not knowing. Jesus echoes this sentiment centuries later when he said, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I've heard an addendum to that quote. Anyone else heard, first the truth will piss you off, then it will set you free. For example, some people are awoke to the fact that not all political officials, have our best interests at heart. This is a piss-off. This truth is a piss-off. Or that the monetary realm is not necessarily set up to serve the needs of humanity. This truth is a piss-off. Or to learn that not all humans are good, but there are elements in society that are evil. This is a wake-up and a piss-off. It's eye-opening information that sets us free from ignorance. And let us be clear, we are all ignorant. We are all ignorant. Every one of us is ignorant. We're just ignorant in different things, in different ways. I may be ignorant about how to set up my new bed from IKEA. But once I get the right information and understand the picture correctly, I am no longer ignorant. And I'm free to set up the furniture correctly. You are ignorant about something else. But the hope of humanity is that we can overcome our ignorance. Our freedom is contingent on it. This is why we are tying together freedom with the art and science of knowing. The art and science of knowing, which of course we're also tying in with the power of love, and even with the ideal of peace, or gruntledness, as you may prefer to call it. This important perspective was first expressed in the very first session of the first series of the School of Love, called Is There a Reason to Life? A Reason to Love? There you heard my now viral impersonation of Agent Smith asking Neo, "Why, Mr. Anderson? Why? Why do you do it? Can you tell me what it is? Do you even know? Is it freedom or truth? Perhaps peace? Could it be love?" Maybe your concern has just been only about freedom. Freedom of speech, intellectual freedom, and so on. Here, Agent Smith, or actually the Wachowskis who wrote The Matrix, are tying together this idea of freedom with truth, with love, and peace. And likewise, in this third series of the School of Love, we're putting together these pieces of freedom, knowledge, love, and peace into a DIY plan. It's almost as if Agent Smith is trying to answer, trying to compute these deep philosophical questions for himself, endeavoring to overcome his own ignorance or disgruntledness. It's also helpful to understand a subtle but important linguistic difference between the words ignorance and nescience. Ignorance and nescience. Nescience may be new to you, as it was to me until recently, but I actually find this a very useful word. Nescience is actually much how it sounds. Ne, science. And science, of course, means to know. And it's what science endeavors to do, to live up to this name, to know things, to know everything. So then nescience means the opposite, to not know, to not know. For example, when I was in Costa Rica and driving a rental car, someone asked me if I had my passport on me. I did not. And then I was told that tourists need to carry their passports while driving a rental car, along with your driver's license. I was nescient of that fact. I did not know that fact. Whereas ignorance also is as it sounds. Ignore-ance. Ignore-ance. It's more the act of ignoring. So when it comes to knowing, we could say there are two ways of not knowing. Ignorance and nescience. That is ignoring or not knowing. Absolutely not knowing. A lot of what we call ignorance is actually nescience. A person doesn't know about something, and furthermore, they don't know that they don't know. So they are nescient about it. They are not knowing. A good way to contextualize this is to ask the question, are a lot of our global problems caused by nescience or ignorance? By not knowing or by actually ignoring what we do know? It seems evident we know a lot, but actively ignore what we know. We don't connect the dots to do something with it, put it into action. Quite simply, we are not paying attention and are ignoring what we know, and perhaps even willfully choosing to do so. That's ignorant. And I am ignorant. And I've seen times in my life, I can look back at my life, and maybe you too, and I'll be part of the love assignment for this session. I look back at my life and see a number of occasions when I knew something, but something in me acted as if I didn't know it. I ignored it and stayed in kind of a superficial state of consciousness. Knowing but pretending I didn't know. Ignoring something. In terms of all of us being parts of a one body, like fingers on hands, this means that we're not working together with what we know. We have the necessary information. We are not nascent of it. We are ignoring it, which in fact, that takes a decision to ignore something, which may be at a subconscious level, but nevertheless, we are applying willful ignorance and suppressing something. This is something of which we are quite capable because we have freedom of will. You're getting it. Yeah, we have freedom of will. We have freedom to be ignorant, to decide to ignore something and not do something about something we could, because we have the information. We're not nascent. But in the end, we need to be held accountable for this. And so now we have this new word, nescience, which gives us a new concept, which opens a new window on the world. It actually points to an important mode of knowing. So a lot of what we are learning here, of course, in this third series is what we call epistemology, the art and science of knowing, which includes love. And there will be a lot of things involved if we are to make knowing a conscious act and maximize the potential of human processing. So, in moving forward, in light of today's title, How to Set Yourself Free, we are largely talking about freeing of the mind. When you start talking about the mind, we are getting into deep territory and have to acknowledge that the mind of modern people is suffering. In the past, our ancestors probably suffered more physically. But global pandemics and lockdowns aside, it appears a modern condition has arisen with a growing pandemic of mental illness. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, has stated that depression is the #2 medical burden in the world. While this trend may be alarming, interestingly, I have a book called From Normal to Healthy. From Normal to Healthy, subtitled Paths to the Liberation of Consciousness. It's a bit of a dense read, but just the title says a lot. From Normal to Healthy. It's implying that the normal is to be unhealthy, right? And that seems to be becoming the new normal. But we don't have to stop there. At least get to the subtitle. Paths to the Liberation of Consciousness. And this path in this book, laid out by the author, Georg Kuhlewind, is based on the work and insights offered by Rudolf Steiner. And I will be introducing some of these ideas in this series. The first thing to note is that a path involves steps. The old idea of instantaneous enlightenment, based on Kundalini awakening or Shaktipat from a guru, or even through a shamanistic journey using psychedelics that temporarily pulls back the veil and reveals a glimpse of a greater reality, is not something that happens very often, or that we can count on, or is even necessarily suitable to where we have evolved to with our modern state of consciousness. But rather, going through steps and stages of development is perhaps more suitable to where we've evolved. We have become much more thinking ego beings and have created a left brain dominant society for ourselves, which is out of balance and therefore a contributing factor to depression and mental health issues. And even though we need to restore more of our right brain capacity, regressing back into the right brain way of being is actually also part of the mental health crisis. Right brain functioning, as characterized in the previous session, needs to be amalgamated with what we have won in terms of left brain development, and to not lose the positive powers of the ego, which humanity has brought on board over recent centuries. We really want to center things now, not dissolve the ego. It is only egotism we wish to dissolve and resolve. So this book looks at how the development of consciousness is something that has to go through steps and stages, and asks the paradoxical, if not circular question, what are the conscious steps we need to become conscious? What are the conscious steps we need to become conscious? A bit circular, but it's going somewhere. The book goes on to show that the idea of steps and stages of consciousness is not a vague thing, but is seen quite clearly already in the development of every human being from the moment we are born. The developmental period of a human being is the longest of all beings on the planet. Some animals have a longer gestation period than humans, but in terms of the developmental period to adulthood, humans take the longest to get their offspring out of the nest. Why? Why so long? Well, primarily because it is about following required developmental stages that will lead to consciousness, and potentially to higher consciousness. The human is evidently evolving this thing called consciousness, and the development period of life really extends through the first 21 years of life. The reason the human, as a mammal, goes longer than any other mammal is because the human is really only part mammal. We're part mammal. We also have an ego, which is the bearer of consciousness and the seed of higher consciousness. And so our developmental period is prolonged to cater to this evolutionary imperative. With each progressive generation, the hope of life is that each generation takes this imperative for consciousness a step further, that the capacity for consciousness grows, extends further, expands wider, goes higher. This is why the kindergarten teacher is the most important teacher in a child's life. That's where the foundation, the rooting, takes place for all the subsequent stages to build upon. The first stage of life, the first 7 years, the foundation for consciousness is literally laid into the physical body. The physical body will never grow more than it does in the first 7 years. And as I said in the previous session, the learning at that stage is indirect. Indirect. It's not from books or direct teaching from a teacher, but it is the pouring in from the environment as the child soaks up the environment like a sponge. And so you could say that consciousness at that stage is literally being put into the flesh and bones of the child. This is the imperative of this approximately 7-year stage, the growth of the bodily structure having its day, learning to stand, walk, talk, imitate. This takes place until the discharge of the baby teeth, sometimes known as the milk teeth. When those teeth fall out, that announces the arrival of the next stage. It's a very physical announcement, the arrival of the next stage of consciousness. For the following 7 years, from 7 to 14, the foundation for consciousness is being worked into the movement of the child, both outer and inner movement. a child is really beginning to move in the world with its body. Why? Because consciousness is not a static thing. Consciousness requires movement. It requires duality, interaction. So the inner and outer movement is developed during this second 7-year stage and comes to a crescendo with another physical announcement. The arrival of puberty. Oh no! Puberty and the blooming of organs in the physical body. Very physical thing announcing a new stage and a new opening for consciousness. Then in the following 7-year phase, from 14 to 21, still in the primary development stage of life, laying the foundations of consciousness, we see the importance of the development of the human personality. The human personality. This is the imperative of this stage. Everybody needs a personality as another container for the ego, for consciousness, along with the container of the physical body. In psychology, they refer to it as the mask for the psyche. The psyche needs a mask, much the same way the actors in ancient Greece would put on a mask so something from beyond the actor could speak through it. Something from beyond could speak through the mask. And this is exactly what is being hoped for here in this stage, that something higher will speak through the personality of the actor, the human. What? What is hoped that will speak through the personality, through the mask of the personality? The ego. The capital E, ego. The real human, the I. Because that's what it's all about. That's what all this preparation is all about. Preparing for the ego. And this is the thing that separates us from mammals and animals. That's why there's this long haul of 21 years, this developmental period. It's anticipating that the I am aware ego self will sit upon the throne and become the sovereign bearer of consciousness. What I've just described is the basis and ideal of the Waldorf school movement that I trained and taught in, and also informs the content of this book, From Normal to Healthy. Now, we know that this ideal that I described isn't necessarily the way it works out, as it certainly didn't for me, and I imagine for many of you. Things come to scuttle this ideal of the ego becoming sovereign within itself. There's difficulties, there's traumas, there's substance abuse, there's sexual disturbances, all sorts of things can scuttle the developmental process, mess up the mind, cause inflation of the ego, and so forth, which is, as the book title suggests, is the normal. It's normal that we have issues, we have things that we have to work with. In fact, this messed normal is the foundation from which we have to work from to find the healthy. We work from this normal state of unhealthiness to find what is healthy. So if you are feeling screwed up, unhealthy in body or mind, perhaps depressed, anxious, and wishing you didn't have to deal with the mess you feel inside, do not despair over that. That is normal. That is a normal state. It is then just a matter of, as the subtitle suggests, finding the path for the liberation of consciousness, the advancement of consciousness. Let's take a moment here to do another meditation again, heart meditation. So just finding a comfortable posture where you can be in your verticality. You can open up your lung space, your heart space, your center of centers. Feel into the center. Feel how it feels right now, being with the breath as it draws your awareness in. And also feel the space surrounding your heart center, the space that holds you, and whatever is in that space. Sense the dawning of a light in that space, a blue light, like the coming of early dawn. Healing blue light. Feeling the qualities of blue in the surroundings, reaching your heart center. Blue touching your heart, entering your heart. Breathing out from your heart. And allow this blue to morph from blue to blue-green, eventually becoming green as the light strengthens. Experience the green of the earth. Green filling the surrounding space around you, holding you, touching you at your heart center. And raying out from your heart center with each exhalation. More healing energy surrounding you and infusing you. Now this dawning light turning a golden yellow. Growing brighter, more intense. Golden yellow coming from the periphery, surrounding you, and coming into your core center. Turning your heart into a golden sun, raying out its rays. Golden light breathed in, golden light breathed out. Growing your heart as a sun center. Breathing in light, breathing out light. And as you breathe in, hear the words calm in you. And as you breathe out, speak the words, I am calm. Breathe in calm in you. Breathe out, I am calm. Now breathing in, hear the words strength in you. Breathing out, speak the words, I am strong. Strengthen you. I am strong. Now breathe in the words here, love in you. Breathing out, speak, I am love. Love in you. I am love. Being with this dialogue between the higher self and yourself. Love in you. I am love. Now allowing the intensity of the golden light morph to a softer orange. Orange in the surroundings. Orange in your center. Let it soften again to dark red, the red of the dusk and the descending light. And so where does this path lead after a human has finished the 21-year long haul of what is really only the preparatory stage of life? This 21-year long haul is really just the preparatory stage of life. Where does it lead? You get a job, right? So you can pay to get out of the house. You start acting responsibly and hope for a good time because you know you're not here for a long time, right? Your physical body is no longer growing like it did before, and sooner or later, the Grim Reaper is going to take it down. No, it's time to start living at age 21 with the arrival of the ego. The ego has landed. The ego has arrived on the world stage. And now the ego awareness on board, what? Another 7-year phase begins. In fact, another 21-year phase. Again, made up of 3 sets of 7. This is all part of the geometry and mathematical basis of existence. The mechanical aspect that supports the organical. And you can see some of the math and geometry on this chart here, which I'll refer to more in a moment. This human biography chart. And so when we look at the next 3 stages of 7 years, the next 21 years, building upon the first 21 years, again with the evolutionary imperative of unfolding consciousness, taking it a further step, headed in the direction of higher consciousness, there are 3 operative words: sentience, intelligence, and conscience. Conscience. These 3 words are what distinguish the next 3 stages and will be made clear as I characterize what each of these 3 phases look like. As you all well know from experience, when you hit 21, if you haven't already done so, there's an impulse to go beyond the physical and metaphysical walls of the parental domain. You want to be your own person. You want to expand your boundaries. You want freedom, freedom, freedom. Right? Why? Again, something inside, a deep desire. Desideri, the impulse of the cosmos planted within you, is driving you toward greater consciousness. So in this stage, it's all about getting greater experience, which is basically what this first word, sentience, is pointing to. You are a sentient being. You have senses. You have sensitivity. So you want to expand beyond the box. Have sensory experiences of the world. Get a bit mucky. Take some hits. Maybe some bruises. To wake up your consciousness through experiencing the phenomenons of life. And store these experiences in your mind body, along with everything else gone into your development so far. This is the character of the phase from 21 to 28, the sentient period. What follows the sentience phase? And the next phase is known as the intelligence phase. From sentience to intelligence. This is the stage where intelligence gets to exercise itself upon what it took in on a personal level during the sentience stage, right? Intelligence gets to exercise itself upon what it took in during the sentience stage. This intelligence works off the foundations for intelligence laid down during the early developmental stages, but now works not with the material given to it from the home and classroom and upbringing, but rather the material handed to it in the school of life. That's what it has to apply its intelligence to. If you look back at your 20s and look what happened in your life, at what life handed you in the school of life, what kind of stuff you got into, and what kind of stuff got into you. And you start digesting it and start asking new questions about that. You're becoming what you're doing, what comes in the intelligence stage. Looking back, digesting, asking new questions. That's what the intelligence stage looks like, 28 to 35. You are exercising an awakening intelligence to try and understand what you garnered in the sentience stage, because there's a lot of information there. After you hit 21, you moved out in more ways than one, moving beyond blood lineage, moving beyond hereditary influences, into something that is extremely personal and individual to you. You're simultaneously discovering and carving who you are as an individual self. And you need to be working with your intelligence to do it. Intelligence, from the Latin word intelligere, to choose between. It is similar to the word discern, which means to distinguish between, to separate by sifting, sorting. You get into your 30s and you're needing to make serious decisions and be serious about your decisions. So this sifting, sorting, separating the wheat from the chaff is what characterizes this stage. You're really carving yourself for the future, which is the next 7-year cycle from 35 to 42. We move from sentience to intelligence, building upon them in a phase we could call conscience. What is conscience? The word itself, con, and science, literally means to know with, or with knowing. Conscience is with knowing. Doesn't that sound great? To think you can finally, by the age of 35, be able to live with knowing. The knowing that is rooted in the phases before. The developmental period, followed by the sentience phase, venturing out into the world and getting immersed in it, followed by thinking about your life, feeling into your life, what you've experienced in life, and what that means about life in general. During the intelligence stage, then comes the emergence of conscience. Conscience, where the experiencing, then the sifting and sorting turns into a phase of integrating. Integrating. Conscience is often thought of something that guides us. An inner voice, an inner prompter that tells us what is right from wrong. And this characterization of conscience is correct. And that voice, the inner prompter, is you. It is what you have developed and integrated up to this point, and is another major step on the path to the liberation of consciousness and going from normal to healthy. It is also the end of another 21-year cycle, placing you at the threshold of another quantum leap in life, the age 42 threshold. You've completed the sentient stage, characterized by the primary mandate to have sentient experiences, then the intelligence stage, characterized by the primary mandate to think and reflect on things, and integrating that understanding so that during the conscience stage, you can begin to live with knowing, conscience, all these stages enabling the possibility for true consciousness. True consciousness. True consciousness because it's coming out of you. Consciousness, the possibility for consciousness has grown within you. So you can have true consciousness coming out of you. So then what? At this 42 age threshold, when I was young, I often heard from adults something you don't often hear these days, that life begins at 40. You ever heard that? Life begins at 40. You ever heard that? No? Yeah, you don't hear that much. I don't think people like to hear that in our youth-oriented culture. And of course, it didn't make sense to me either at the time. At age 16, I just got my driver's license, which to me felt like the biggest threshold in my life so far, and that my life then was going to start. Life started when you got your driver's license. And I felt a huge sense of freedom to be able to take my parents' wheels, roll down the driveway, and fly off. My real life was just beginning. Oh, to be 16 again, right? Actually, no. No, there is some truth to this idea of life beginning at 40. And seeing that I've crossed that threshold myself, I can say I have experienced it. What? What is it? Why would there be a sense of life starting at 40, around the 42-year mark? Well, at 42, something happens that echoes what happened at 21. At 21, a human has completed a 21-year cycle, which is the lead up to the stepping in of the ego. The ego literally steps in at age 21. At age 42, after the completion of another 21-year cycle, something else happens for the ego. Not just a stepping in, but rather a stepping up. A stepping up of the ego. It has gone through a 21-year period that is focused on the development of the inner life. Just as the first 21 years were focused on outer development, bodily development, right? From birth through for 21 years, you're developing this outer life and bodily development. And because of this second 21-year development, the potential is there not just for the ego to step in, as it did at 21, entering the world stage, but now to step up because of the 21 years it spent developing an inner life. An inner life. But what does stepping up mean? It's a cute turn of phrase, but what does it look like? It really can have a look of two directions. Because the previous 42 years have focused first on the outer life and then on the inner life, the stepping up can be in either direction. Either outer or inner, or both. If one were to put their efforts into stepping it up in the outer world, then they could move up in the world, as they say. They could really step up into some powerful public work, be in a higher position, a mover and shaker, and in a position to hand down to the world the value they have accrued and building themselves up so far. They could be closer to their true self, closer to their higher self, bringing down the goods, so to speak. Stepping up so they can bring down the downloads and the direction to society. The other direction they can step up with is inward. The inner life of the ego self can step up. It is not so much about making a physical dent in the world as to making serious and significant inroads in the inner life. The ego can step it up and step upon the path of inner development and knowing much more strongly. The capacities are there. The capacities have matured and bloomed in the inner life and inner knowing. All that has been secured in the stages of sentience, intelligence, and conscience can go further, much further. The stages have been set, and now the ego's real inherent powers can unfold and step up into something even higher. Consciousness, higher consciousness. And the reason for this, or more so the requirement for this, is because the ego naturally has greater access to its own higher self. This is intended to be the natural unfolding of things. This is part and parcel of the planet. But of course, as I stated, with the planet, for the landing of the ego at 21, there is more often than not things that get in the way of the intended geometry of this. So the ego has to sometimes work hard to get things back on track. It has to work hard at inner work, healing work, and so on. But what I've described is the basic geometry of life, the way things work when in accord with nature. And as it says here, down in the corner of this biography chart, which comes from this book called The Human Life by George O'Neill. This chart came with this book, again based on Steiner's work. It says, your own life has a pattern. It is a time organism like that of an unfolding plant. A plant is a time organism. It has a pattern. It has steps and stages. Root, sapling, stalk, leaf, calyx, bloom, fruit, seed, and so forth. We are also having a plant nature, along with a mineral nature and an animal nature. But our plant nature is the primary part that, when in accord with nature, brings about this maturing in a patterned way. Now, a lot of people find this really interesting when they see that there is a geometry to life beyond puberty and so forth, that it goes on and on right through life into adulthood. As we've laid out, actually, we've mapped it out up to age 63. 21, 21, 21, 63. And so in this next phase we're describing, this next phase of the unfolding, the entire third 21-year cycle, it is possible for the I Am, the egoic self, to step up into a higher I, a higher self, a higher octave of egoness, egohood, whatever you want to call it. We are talking about a higher self grown organically from the seed of the lower self. And this is the prime source of potential for the entire earth. Let me repeat that again, because I just said it's the prime source of potential for the earth. We're talking about the maturation of the human ego coming into a higher octave of itself to become a higher version of itself, grown organically from the seed of the lower self, the lower nature. This is the prime source of potential for the planet. We carry that within ourselves. The greater self emerging out of the limited self, transcending the limitations of space and time. How? Via the higher self. Now, an additional important point needs to be inserted here, as some of you are no doubt not only asking how does this all work, but also how long? How long does this take? How long does it take to get there, to that state of the higher self? We have introduced in this session the life stages to show the path, the progression, the template that a human life follows in accordance with nature. First, in accord with how our physiology directs and downloads as a process of nature. It's part of the planet. However, the good news, this important point, is that once we get past the initial stage, the initial developmental stage, and the ego has landed, the process can be accelerated. It can be accelerated if a person chooses to take up a systematic path of personal development. That is largely left up to our own free will work as to how far and how fast we move down the evolutionary highway. So what I've laid out as a time template is the natural course of nature. But for those who wish to accelerate their development, their initiation, it can be done by working with a systematic path of personal development. Attainment to higher self and higher consciousness can be expedited. This is why we can speak of freedom, a higher form of freedom, a truer freedom, in a word, liberation. Liberation. Not just freedom from a physical lockdown, or freeing your face from wearing a mask, or freeing your nipples from being in lockdown under a shirt and bra. Nasty stuff. But from the physical limitations of our very body. The limitation of your own body, your own brain, and the illusions of the Maya matrix attached to the senses realm. We need to look toward a higher form of freedom, that can only be found in the cultivation of the higher self. That's the road ahead, the next level, to getting greater access to downloads and direction from on high. So in summary, in this session, we have taken the time to look at a series of words: nascience, ignorance, sentience, intelligence, and conscience. This sequence of words paints a picture of the organic sequence of going from not knowing to knowing. This sequence is completely aligned and organic to how life should unfold and leads to a higher living thinking. When it comes to not knowing, we looked at the words nascience and ignorance. To be entirely without knowing, nascience, and then to act ignorantly by ignoring what we know, ignorance. Then how the human progresses through knowing via sentience or sentient experiences through the senses, then intelligence to conscience. So the full progression from start to finish is to go from nascience to conscience, without science to with science. And of course, this begs the question, what do we mean by science? What is it to science something? This is a very important question, an epistemological question, how to know. And we keep circling around this central question. Science seeks to know, but does science know the way it is set up today in the Newtonian Cartesian sense? Does science really know how to know? We'll continue to unpack this in the sessions ahead as we continue to explore where love fits in the whole equation of things, the theory of everything, including love. But to leave you with a little teaser, one could say there are basically two ways of sciencing, of knowing. We can know things through our senses. If I look at a tree with my senses, I can know the tree through my senses. It is what is called sensible knowledge, coming from the outside. However, if I were to think of a tree where there is no tree around me, no tree to perceive with my senses, is this sensible knowledge? Is this sensible knowing of the tree? No. My senses are not involved in knowing the tree at that time. So it is knowing beyond the senses, or supersensible knowledge. Supersensible knowledge. It is supersensible activity. You just think of a tree and know the tree that way without the senses. To further this example and this teaser, if I am out in the forest and look at a tree, I'm knowing it with my senses sciencing. If I then look away from the tree, close my eyes, and I conjure up a mental picture, a picture from my memory of the tree, am I using my senses? No. So it's not sensible knowing, it's super sensible. It's a super sensible experience, a knowing that is beyond the senses. A sciencing that started with the senses, but then moved into something that didn't involve the senses. In our day-to-day experience of life, it is mostly a mixing of these two experiences, sensible and supersensible. But we're not aware of this important fact. We don't want to pay attention to it. You could say we are ignoring this fact that at all the time we are mixing sensible knowing and supersensible knowing. And this may surprise you to think that this simple activity would qualify as a supersensible experience. But to quote from Steiner's classic book, How to Know Higher Worlds, which is really a DIY manual, training manual on developing your supersensible powers so you can science with both your senses and your supersensible capacities and learn how to perceive things that are otherwise inaccessible to your senses, such as higher dimensions beyond the physical, you could say. Steiner says, quote, "Within my own feelings and thoughts, the highest mysteries lie concealed. But until now, I have not perceived them. Within my own feelings and thoughts, the highest mysteries lie concealed. But until now, I have not perceived them." He also says, in the same text, we should be clear that development begins with the feelings and thoughts we live with all the time, but that these feelings and thoughts must be given a new, unaccustomed direction. This was a surprise to me as well, when it dawned on me that the very thing that I live with in my mundane existence, my thoughts and feelings, were the key to knowing higher dimensions, and that I just needed to work with these. I didn't necessarily need to go to the Amazon and do ayahuasca or use some such agent of activation that is hopefully going to give me some instantaneous enlightenment, but rather I could dig for the highest mysteries that lie concealed within my thoughts and feelings, right in my own backyard. Isn't that a nice thought? Especially when under a lockdown and traveling is discouraged. And even if I did go to the Amazon and had big openings on ayahuasca, I still need to work with my thoughts and feelings with will. I still need to work with my thoughts and feelings with will to give them, quote, a new, unaccustomed direction. What was most shocking about all of this is that the new and modern path of development is as plain as the nose on your face, which is why it's so hard to see it at first, right? It's hard to see your own nose. But that is what we have to work with, and it's right there all the time. The starting place is your ordinary thoughts and feelings, realizing they are already a super sensible experience. Then working in that realm into which the higher self with higher capacities can emerge, giving you really the only hope of freedom. Another thing to notice, how our ordinary powers of mental picturing play into this new capacity. Mental picturing. We'll be looking at this more deeply in the next couple of sessions because we need to focus on the development of these basic capacities and turn them into super powers, super sensible powers, turning you into a superpowered you, 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 super powered you. Yeah. Well, what I want to do is give out the, people are snapping their fingers in applause to that. I think I should give the love assignment for this week. So the first one is ignorance versus nescience. Understand the difference between nescience and ignorance in your own life. Nescience means we truly don't know something, and furthermore, we may not know we don't know. It's not knowing. So this keeps us humble and acknowledging we have much to learn and understand. Whereas ignorance is when we act in a way that ignores what we do know, or we have not thought it through thoroughly enough to put knowledge into service. This can be due to our own egotism, even, that we act ignorantly. So where do you humbly acknowledge areas of nescience, not knowing, that need more knowing? And where do you acknowledge areas of knowing that you are ignorantly ignoring and need more application? So that is the first love assignment. The second one is sentience, intelligence, conscience. As sentient beings having experiences through the sensitivity of our senses, we are taking in information all the time that needs to be sifted and sorted through to get the real data of our daily lives. This is what intelligence does. Our threefold intelligence of thinking, feeling, and willing to live with clearer choices. Out of this, we can live a life with conscience, with knowing, guided by a higher developed place in ourselves. This may seem like a slower and harder road to enlightened living, but it is actually the safer and more expedited path to bringing our higher self and higher potential into realization. So the assignment is to really see how this plays out in our life, having experiences, reflecting on them, and then integrating that into a higher knowing that guides us the next day. So yeah, really spend some time with those three words, three concepts, and three ways of being. The progression of the three, which leads us into the third. Can you guess what it's going to be? Yes, you got it, the Rakshao, which is exactly that. Having sentient experiences through our senses during the day, and then at the end of the day, we sit and apply intelligence. We reflect on it. We think about it. We feel into it. Going through it in reverse gives us that objectivity. And then something crystallizes in the development of our conscience. And in the next day, we're not the same. We live differently because we're working with that threefold pattern. So, yep, the Rakshao is something to do every day for the rest of your life. It's the number one practice. So this is part of what it'll do. It'll help elevate the mind to see the beauty, the truth, the goodness, the magic, and the epic. Because every one of our lives has epic adventures. You know, the cosmological adventures are happening in our mundane existence. We just don't recognize it. We don't perceive it because our mind is not oriented to that way. And that's part of what the School of Love is trying to do here, is to orient you to the fact that every one of us is archetypal and is having an archetypal epic experience in the adventure of our life. And we're just being talked out of it by, watching the news or watching TV and thinking, oh, those movie stars are so great, having great lives, and I'm just some, toad with little existence, compared to them, not realizing a lot of those movie stars are boring, messed up people, that are just acting out archetypal characters on a screen. Well, we need to step into the archetype of being human, and we'll see it more and more when we're doing the Rakshao. These things will pop out. So don't give up on it. Don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on seeing your life in a new light by practicing this number one exercise. But it is a muscle, and it needs to be exercised regularly, like with any kind of exercise, and it'll get stronger. And there may be things that you don't want to see. You know, there'll be things about ourselves that we don't want to see, so we kind of like avoid it. But, you know, break through to the gold that's in the shadow mind. And that will motivate you in this challenging inner work. It is called inner work for a reason. But at the end of the day, do you want to be known for your outer work or your inner work? What do you take with you? You take your inner work with you. I've never seen a hearse pull on a U-Haul. This ruckshaw, you know, it could be just 3-4 minutes, or you can do it for 10 or 15 minutes. You should really not need to go like half an hour in a ruckshaw unless you're really into it, like that picture of sparkling water. You just want to be in it for 10 minutes. Like, go for it. It's going to feed your heart. So yeah, this will just take a few minutes with eyes closed. And we're starting with the most recent thing done here, which is being in this circle, this conversation. Jesse went through the love assignment for this week and posted them in the chat. Before that, we had the music break. So watching Whitney Houston singing Higher Love. Before that was the Steve Winwood version. Prior to that, Jesse spoke about the stages of life, human biography, and the stages of knowing, moving towards higher consciousness as a way to set ourselves free. And prior to that, we gathered together. You got yourself ready for the evening, either getting yourself here to the loft or ready to go on Zoom. And then where were you before that? Picture that. Perhaps you had dinner. What did you eat? Where did you eat? Who did you eat with? See it, feel a sense of the allness of that. And this afternoon, where were you this afternoon? Who were you with? See that. The sense of your afternoon, see some details. Just some of the details, you can't see them all. What details are you drawn to? So allowing your mind to review and reverse what happened before that. Encounters with people, even if it's just a brief flash of that person and where you were, you're exercising your mental picturing. Very important. And lunch. Where and what did you have for lunch? What feelings did you have about your lunch? And the morning. Where were you in the morning? Who were you with? What did you do? Picture it. And moving back earlier in the morning. What were some of the tasks you did? How do you feel about them now? Going back to breakfast. Did you eat breakfast? Where? What did you have? What were you wearing while you had breakfast? And before breakfast, what did you do between waking and breakfast or going to work? And then going back to those early waking moments, seeing yourself in bed. What was the feeling awakening this morning? Did you have dreams, pictures in your mind as you awoke? What can you recall from that?